Barron Trump was out in public minding his own business when suddenly a stranger approached him. At first it seemed like a casual encounter, just another person passing by. But within seconds the atmosphere changed. The man's voice carried a sharp tone, and the words that came out of his mouth were filled with clear hostility. People around them paused. Conversations quieted. The tension in the air became noticeable. Some individuals instinctively turned their heads, drawn by the unexpected confrontation. Others pulled out their phones, anticipating something dramatic. The stranger, whose face showed a mix of arrogance and anger, spoke in a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You think you're special just because of your last name?" he scoffed. "You've done nothing, yet you live a privileged life. What do you even contribute?" It was the kind of moment that could have escalated quickly. A public insult directed at someone who had spent most of his life in the shadows of one of the most talked-about families in the world. But instead of reacting with anger or defensiveness, Barron did something no one expected. He didn't flinch. He didn't fire back with insults of his own. Instead, he simply looked at the man, his expression calm, almost studying him. A moment of silence passed between them, making the tension even stronger. Then, in a voice that was steady and clear, Barron responded, "It's interesting how you assume you know everything about me," he said. His tone wasn't sarcastic or aggressive. It was composed, mature, almost as if he were having a discussion rather than an argument. The crowd, which had been waiting for some dramatic response, was caught off guard. This wasn't the reaction they had expected. The stranger, still standing firm, seemed slightly taken aback but quickly regained his confidence. "I don't need to know you," he shot back. "I know your type. Born into wealth, never had to struggle, living off your father's success." Again, Barron didn't react emotionally. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if considering the man's words carefully. Then he said something that changed the entire mood of the moment. "Do you believe that insulting someone in public makes you better than them?" His words weren't aggressive, but they carried weight. The question wasn't just directed at the man in front of him. It was a question for everyone who had ever made quick judgments about another person. A few murmurs rippled through the onlookers. The stranger's confident smirk faded slightly, as if he hadn't expected this kind of response. Barron continued, "Privilege isn't about where you come from. It's about what you do with what you have. And what I have is a choice: to engage in negativity or to rise above it." The silence that followed was deafening. Even those who had started recording seemed momentarily lost in thought. It was a simple yet profound statement, and it shifted the entire energy of the situation. The stranger, clearly uncomfortable now, hesitated. He seemed to be searching for a comeback, but nothing came to him. He hadn't expected someone so young to handle the situation with such poise. Finally, Barron gave a small, polite nod and turned to walk away. The moment could have ended there, but the stranger, desperate to regain control of the situation, called after him, "Walking away doesn't prove anything." Without stopping, Barron replied over his shoulder, "It proves I have nothing to prove." And just like that, the crowd that had gathered began to react. Some clapped softly, others exchanged looks of quiet admiration. A few even shook their heads, realizing how different this had turned out from what they had expected. By the time Barron was out of sight, the video of the exchange was already being uploaded to social media. Within hours, it went viral. People from all over had their opinions. Some praised Barron for his maturity, saying that his response showed wisdom beyond his years. Others debated the confrontation, questioning whether the stranger had a point. But regardless of what side people took, one thing was clear. Barron Trump had handled the moment with grace and intelligence, leaving an unforgettable impression. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response isn't shouting back, it's showing strength through self-control. And that's exactly what left the crowd silent. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, cars passing by, people engaged in their conversations, and the occasional sound of a distant siren. Barron Trump was walking through a busy public space, perhaps heading to a cafe or simply enjoying a quiet moment. Dressed casually, he carried himself with the kind of calm confidence that naturally drew attention. Around him, a few people took notice. Some whispered among themselves, recognizing him instantly. Others chose to keep their distance, respecting his privacy. Despite the occasional glance in his direction, Barron remained unfazed, used to the silent stares and hushed murmurs that came with his last name. The atmosphere was ordinary, until it wasn't. From across the sidewalk, a man spotted him. His posture shifted, his expression darkened, and in an instant, he decided to make his move. Whether it was frustration, personal resentment, or simply the urge to provoke, something in him pushed him forward. As Barron approached, the stranger took a step closer, positioning himself directly in his path. The energy changed. Conversations around them slowed, people instinctively turning their heads toward the brewing tension. Some pulled out their phones, sensing something worth capturing. The man, slightly older, his face set with a hardened expression, wasted no time. His voice carried across the space, laced with bitterness. "You think you're special, don't you?" he scoffed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Walking around like you've earned something, like you deserve the attention." Barron stopped. His gaze met the man's, not with anger, not with fear, but with a quiet sense of curiosity. He wasn't startled or thrown off. Instead, he seemed to be studying the stranger, as if trying to understand where this hostility was coming from. The man continued, emboldened by the lack of an immediate response. "You've done nothing," he spat. "You're just another privileged kid living off someone else's name." The tension was thick now. People around them exchanged uncertain glances. Some expected a heated argument. Others anticipated security stepping in. But Barron remained still, his expression unreadable. Then, after a brief pause, he finally spoke. "It's interesting how much you assume about someone you've never met." His voice was steady, calm, yet firm. There was no sarcasm, no defensiveness, just a composed statement that immediately shifted the energy of the moment. The stranger faltered slightly, caught off guard by Barron's unexpected poise. The people watching leaned in, sensing that this wasn't going to unfold the way they had expected. And in that moment, as silence filled the space between them, it became clear. This wasn't just an ordinary confrontation. It was something far more powerful. The air was thick with tension as Barron Trump continued his calm stride through the public square. He was used to being recognized. Whispers, stolen glances, and even the occasional phone lifted to snap a picture. But today was different. A man, standing just a few feet away, locked eyes on him. His expression was tense, his jaw set. Unlike the usual curious onlookers, this man wasn't just watching, he was waiting. And then, without hesitation, he stepped forward, positioning himself directly in Barron's path. The shift in energy was instant. The bustling noise of the crowd seemed to fade as nearby people slowed their steps, sensing something about to unfold. Some exchanged quiet glances, while others instinctively reached for their phones, preparing to capture whatever was coming next. Then the stranger spoke, his voice sharp and dripping with hostility. "Look at you," he sneered, just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Walking around like you're better than everyone else, like you earned this life." A few people gasped. Others murmured, their eyes darting between Barron and the man. The tension thickened. Barron, however, didn't react, not immediately. He stood there, his face calm, his expression unreadable. But his silence seemed to irritate the man even more. "What? Got nothing to say?" the man taunted, stepping even closer. "Guess it must be nice, huh? Having everything handed to you? Never had to work a day in your life. Must be easy when your daddy pays for everything." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring Barron to retaliate. The crowd watched, waiting. Would he snap back? Would he ignore it? For a long moment, Barron simply studied the man, his gaze steady. The weight of the insult, the bitterness in the stranger's voice, it was all so familiar. He had seen it before, heard it before. People who made assumptions, people who thought they knew his life, his struggles, his story. And then finally he spoke, His voice was quiet but firm. "You don't know me." Just 4 words, but they landed with more weight than any insult could. The crowd reacted instantly. Some raised their brows, surprised by his calm demeanor. Others leaned in, waiting to see what would happen next. Even the stranger seemed momentarily thrown off, as if he had expected something different. Anger, defensiveness, maybe even arrogance. But Barron had given him none of that. Instead, he stood there, unshaken. Not as a spoiled rich kid, not as the son of a powerful man, but as someone who refused to let a stranger define him. And in that moment, the power in the confrontation shifted. Barron stood still, the stranger's harsh words hanging heavily in the air. The crowd around them was frozen in a mix of shock and anticipation, eyes darting between the young man and his aggressor. The stranger, emboldened by the silence, crossed his arms and smirked, waiting for a reaction. But Barron didn't rush to respond. He took a moment, his eyes steady on the stranger's face, his expression thoughtful. It was as if he was carefully weighing his words, deciding how best to approach this unexpected confrontation. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, drawn into the tension of the moment. When Barron finally spoke, his voice was calm and controlled, no trace of anger or defensiveness. "I understand why you might feel that way," he began, his tone measured and sincere. "It's easy to make assumptions about people you don't know, especially when they're in the public eye." A ripple of surprise passed through the onlookers. This wasn't the combative response they'd anticipated. Barron wasn't meeting hostility with hostility. He was meeting it with understanding. The stranger's smug expression faltered slightly, caught off guard by the unexpected maturity in Barron's words. He opened his mouth to interject, but Barron gently raised a hand, signaling that he wasn't finished. "But the truth is," Barron continued, "every person, no matter their background or their circumstances, faces their own struggles. Just because my challenges aren't the same as yours doesn't mean they don't exist." The crowd was silent, hanging onto his every word. Some nodded subtly, recognizing the wisdom in what he was saying. Others exchanged glances, perhaps reassessing their own judgments. "You're right about one thing," Barron acknowledged, his gaze steady. "I have been given opportunities that many haven't. But privilege isn't a free pass to an easy life. It comes with its own responsibilities, and it's up to each person to decide what they do with the hand they're dealt." There was a pause as Barron let his words sink in, the crowd absorbing the unexpected depth of his response. The stranger, who had started the confrontation with such confidence, now seemed uncertain, shifting awkwardly under the weight of the attention. "You could have just walked away," the stranger muttered, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. Barron nodded. "I could have," he agreed. "But that wouldn't change anything. Sometimes it's important to stand and address things head-on, not with anger, but with understanding. It's the only way we learn from each other." The stranger had no comeback. The power dynamics had shifted, and he knew it. What had started as an attempt to belittle Barron had turned into a moment of reflection, not just for him, but for everyone watching. A few people in the crowd began to clap, softly at first, then louder as more joined in. It wasn't a cheer for victory. It was an acknowledgement of grace under pressure, of wisdom where none had been expected. Barron nodded slightly in acknowledgement of the crowd, his face a mixture of humility and resolve. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving the stranger and the gathered crowd to reflect on what had just happened. "How's that? Want to adjust anything? Or should we keep the momentum going with the next part? Let me know." The tension in the air was thick. The stranger had just finished his insult, standing there with a smug grin, expecting Barron to react in frustration or anger. The crowd, drawn in by the confrontation, watched closely, some whispering among themselves, others waiting for what would happen next. But Barron didn't react the way they expected. Instead of showing anger, instead of firing back with a sharp retort, he simply smiled. A calm, knowing smile that seemed to unsettle the stranger more than any insult could. He took a slow step forward, his presence steady and composed. His voice, when he finally spoke, wasn't filled with anger or sarcasm. but with a quiet confidence that immediately commanded attention. "It's easy to throw insults at people you don't know," Barron said, his eyes locking onto the strangers. "But it's harder to be the person who actually makes a difference." The words hung in the air, settling over the crowd like a wave. A few people in the audience exchanged glances, recognizing the depth of what he had just said. The stranger, however, wasn't ready to back down. "Oh, so now you're going to act all wise," he scoffed, folding his arms. Barron's smile didn't waver. He tilted his head slightly, considering his words. Then he replied, "I don't have to act wise. I just believe that if you have a voice, you should use it for something bigger than tearing others down." The crowd stirred. Some nodded in agreement. Others simply stared, processing the weight of his words. The stranger, who had started this whole thing with so much confidence, suddenly looked uncomfortable. Barron continued, his voice unwavering. "You don't have to like me. You don't even have to respect me. But ask yourself, what did you gain by trying to bring me down? Did it make your life better? Did it change anything? For you?" Silence. The stranger shifted on his feet, but he had no immediate response. Barron took a step back, giving the man space to think. Then he added one final thought, his voice calm but firm. "Anyone can insult, but if you really want to be heard, say something worth listening to." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and then, slowly, applause started. It wasn't a loud, rowdy cheer. It was a quiet, steady acknowledgement of the maturity and grace with which Barron had handled the situation. The stranger, now visibly uncomfortable, muttered something under his breath and turned to leave. He had expected a fight, but what he got was something far more powerful, a lesson he hadn't been prepared for. Barron took a breath, then with the same calm energy he walked away, leaving behind an audience that wouldn't forget his words anytime soon. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. It stretched long and heavy, as if the entire world had paused to absorb what had just happened. The stranger stood there, his face frozen in an awkward mix of frustration and disbelief. He had expected a reaction, anger, humiliation, maybe even an argument. But what he got was something far more powerful. Barron's words still lingered in the air like an echo refusing to fade. The crowd, which had been buzzing with whispers and hushed gasps just moments ago, now seemed spellbound. Some exchanged glances, others stood motionless, trying to process the weight of what they had just witnessed. Then, somewhere in the middle of the gathering, a single clap rang out. It was hesitant at first, almost uncertain, but it broke the silence like a drop of water in a still pond. And then another, and another. Within seconds, the hesitant claps turned into a steady applause, growing louder, stronger. A wave of recognition swept through the crowd. This wasn't just about a young man shutting down an insult. It was about the way he did it. Barron had not raised his voice. He had not resorted to the same disrespect he had been shown. He had stood his ground with an unshakable calm, choosing intelligence and dignity over hostility. And the people saw it. They felt it. The stranger, now visibly uncomfortable, shifted on his feet. His confidence, so bold and unshaken just minutes ago, had all but disappeared. He opened his mouth as if searching for a comeback, something to regain control of the situation. But there was nothing left to say. He had lost, not in an argument, but in the way that mattered most. As the applause continued, someone pulled out a phone, then another. The moment was too powerful not to be captured. Cameras flashed, videos started recording, and within seconds, the scene was being shared across social media. No one could have predicted that this simple confrontation would turn into something much bigger. Within hours, the video had spread like wildfire. The internet was buzzing. Headlines appeared across platforms. Barron Trump's unshakable response leaves crowd speechless. Powerful words that shut down an insult. A lesson in class and confidence. People shared their thoughts, praising his composure, his wisdom beyond his years. Some even compared the moment to historical speeches, drawing parallels to great leaders who had used words as their weapon instead of anger. Meanwhile, Barron himself, he didn't bask in the attention. He didn't go online to boast about the moment. He simply walked away that day, as calm and collected as he had been from the start. For him, it wasn't about proving anything. It was about standing by what he believed. And that, in the end, was what made his response so unforgettable. It didn't take long for the moment to spread. Within hours, the video had made its way across social media platforms. It started with a few bystanders posting clips, captioning them with phrases like "Barron Trump's classy response" and "This is how you handle an insult." But soon, it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even major news outlets picked it up. The views skyrocketed. Millions watched as Barron remained calm in the face of an unexpected public insult. People were captivated, not just by the incident itself, but by how he handled it. In a world where public confrontations often escalate into shouting matches or viral controversies, Barron had taken a different approach. He had responded not with anger, but with confidence and intelligence. And that was what made it so powerful. Social media was flooded with reactions. Some users applauded his maturity. "This young man has more composure than most adults. Impressive. That's how you handle disrespect. With grace, not aggression. Barron Trump just schooled that guy without even raising his voice." Others debated the situation, questioning whether he should have responded at all. Why didn't security step in? This should have never happened in the first place. Was it really that big of a deal? Or are people overreacting? But beyond the online discussions, the media had also taken notice. News anchors dissected the moment, analyzing every detail. Some highlighted Barron's ability to remain composed under pressure, comparing it to the qualities of a true leader. Others speculated on what this might mean for his future. Was this a glimpse of a rising public figure? Political commentators weighed in as well. Some saw the incident as a testament to Barron's upbringing, crediting his parents for instilling in him the ability to handle criticism with grace. Others used it as an example of how public figures, even those not in politics, face constant scrutiny. Meanwhile, the clip continued to gain traction, crossing millions of views in just a day. Hashtags like "Barron handles it," "class over conflict," and "respectful response" started trending. Influencers, celebrities, and public figures even chimed in, with many praising the way Barron had shut down the insult without sinking to the level of his critic. Despite all the attention, Barron himself remained silent. He didn't respond to the media frenzy, didn't post about it, didn't seek any further engagement. To him, the moment had passed. He had said what he needed to say, and that was enough. But for the world watching, it wasn't just a viral clip. It was a reminder. Sometimes, the most powerful response is the one that doesn't rely on anger, but on dignity. And in that moment, Barron Trump had proved that lesson in the most public way possible. As the dust settled and the media frenzy began to fade, one thing remained clear. Barron Trump's response had left an undeniable impact. It wasn't just another viral moment, easily forgotten in the endless stream of internet debates. It was a reminder of something much deeper. How a person chooses to respond to negativity can define their character more than the insult itself. In a time where public figures are often quick to react, engage in heated exchanges, or defend themselves aggressively, Barron had chosen a different path. He didn't yell, he didn't argue, he didn't escalate the situation. Instead, he used intelligence, wit, and composure to turn the moment around. In doing so, he not only silenced his critic, but also earned the respect of millions who watched the encounter unfold. Many who saw the incident took it as a powerful example of grace under fire. People from all walks of life debated the moment, asking themselves how they would have responded in his position. Some believed that standing up for oneself is necessary, while others argued that ignoring negativity altogether is the best approach. But Barron's response presented a third option, a response that doesn't feed into anger, yet doesn't let disrespect go unanswered. His ability to stay calm and turn the situation in his favor raised an important question. What truly defines strength? Is it the ability to fight back, or is it the ability to rise above? This moment also sparked discussions about how public figures, especially those born into the spotlight, navigate a world that constantly watches and judges their every move. Being a part of a political family comes with scrutiny, and Barron has spent much of his life in the public eye. Yet through this single moment, he demonstrated something beyond just good manners. He showed the wisdom and presence of mind that many adults struggle to maintain. The question now lingers. Was this just a one-time response, or does this moment hint at something greater? Could this be a sign that Barron Trump, often seen as a quiet figure, will one day step into a more public role? If so, this incident might just be the first glimpse of the kind of person he is becoming. At the end of the day, his response wasn't about politics or making headlines. It was about handling disrespect with dignity, proving that sometimes the best way to silence negativity is not through shouting, but through intelligence and grace. And so the question remains, what do you think? Did Barron handle it the right way? Or would you have done something differently?